From BQE Restaurant and Lounge in the heart of Atlanta's historic Martin Luther King District, it's Newsmakers Live, bringing you the issues, politics, and perspective of the Atlanta community. Now in its 10th season, here is tonight's moderator and your host, 8-time Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, Mr. Maynard Eaton.
Not only was Peter a major figure at City Hall, he's also a man who's here on the anniversary of Maynard Jackson's election. Maynard Jackson was our first black mayor. Peter Aman could well become our first white mayor since then. Peter, what does that say to you? Does it even matter to you?
Well, it matters a lot in terms of honoring and paying homage to the leaders that built Atlanta. And one of the things I talk about often is the importance of, particularly for me, of recognizing how Atlanta has been built over the last almost 5 decades. That's why our office is in the Oddfellows building just across the way.
You're on Auburn Avenue.
We're on Auburn Avenue, and it's tremendously important. So that is why we remarked upon this anniversary today and on our campaign website and social media, because it is so important. The election of Maynard Jackson put in place a new era for Atlanta that we're still reaping the benefits of, and I think it's very important to acknowledge that.
Is Maynard Jackson shaking in his boots or applauding this new direction?
You know, I don't know. I've met Maynard a few times, but I don't know him well enough to know, or I didn't know him well enough to know how he would be feeling about this. But I'll leave it to others to comment on what he might be feeling.
Is this a seismic shift for Atlanta? We have Mary Norwood, one of your competitors, ostensibly in first place. As we speak now, you are in third place. You are spot on to perhaps be in the runoff. This is a new Atlanta we're looking at?
Well,
politically?
I think that Atlanta, as it always has, is changing to a certain degree. And clearly there are some changes in Atlanta demographically. There are changes in Atlanta in terms of what people want from city government. And so, as I move around town, I try and campaign in every part of the city for every vote, and I listen very closely to what people want. And there clearly are a number of things that people want in common across the city. A safe city, clean city, streets that are fixed, better education, affordable housing.
Affordable
housing. I will tell you, one of the things, I've been a full-time candidate for 18 months, and affordable housing is one of the things that has been talked about that entire time and is really reaching a crescendo now at this point. I mean, in terms of
because people are scared. People think they're going to be forced out.
Yes.
The elderly, and underprivileged.
No, that's exactly right. And I often say that I believe that we have both there are moral and practical reasons why we should not force out of Atlanta the very people that built Atlanta. We can't do that. And so it's complicated, though. There are a lot of different tools that governments have in their toolbox to work on this, but fixing it, making housing affordable, starts with the commitment. So as mayor, I intend to have both the will and commitment to this goal of increasing affordable housing availability.
There are also some who say you have the skill to undo this complicated matter. Yeah. And that might be your biggest calling card.
Well, and in fact, you stole my line. That is actually often what I talk about, because it is complicated. And ultimately, many of the initiatives, whether you talk about community land trusts or incentives to developers, many of them anyway take some degree of money from somebody somewhere. And that is something that I'm good at finding in city government.
Are you good at this?
Yeah.
Are you good at this governing thing?
Well, I tend to think so. I may be a little bit biased, but having worked and watched Mayor Franklin for so many years, really from before she was inaugurated. We started working with her doing our free consulting work the day before Thanksgiving in 2001. And having watched her for a long time and then working as chief operating officer for 2 years for the current administration, I have a pretty good sense. I've run the city for 2 years on a day-to-day basis. I watched Mayor Franklin and her team run it for many years. Is
that what prompted you to seek election for your first time, because you've been running the city and you think the time is right for a fellow like yourself to assume the mantleship of mayor?
Well, really, I'm running for a couple of reasons. One is I believe in an Atlanta where we can have affordable housing. I believe in an Atlanta where we can have early childhood learning. I believe in an Atlanta where we can effectively fix the roads and have better parks and green space and public safety. So there's a series of things that I'm very impatient to see happen in Atlanta. And we've made progress. I mean, the last several administrations clearly have made progress, but there's so much more to be done. I do feel that I bring a unique set of experience, ethics, and leadership to the process, and I can do that.
From day one, Mr. Aman, you said in your opening speech here on Auburn Avenue, you said race frames this election. That was day one, really. Is that still the case now?
Yeah, very much so. It really, I wouldn't say it's every discussion, but in every week, almost in every day, race comes up at some point. Sometimes it's people asking about the statistics of the city. Many times it's people asking about what I would do on a certain policy matter, and they're looking at it through a race lens. The other thing, I've been talking a lot about corruption in this city, and I've been talking about the need to focus on ethics, something I believe very strongly in, and I did a lot of when I was chief operating officer. Some people have interpreted that as racially insensitive, and so that I shouldn't be going quite so hard and talking about ethics. And when people say that, I ask them, well, how would you like me to talk about ethics? I think that honesty and transparency is very important in all government, frankly, around the world. And so how do you talk about it without it sounding like a dog whistle?
But because you were a COO under Mayor Reed, some of your critics, some of your opponents are suggesting maybe you have been complicit in this corruption at City Hall.
They have, and I've been very clear that when I was chief operating officer, anytime I saw something that was questionable, I had it investigated and I had people held accountable. In my first year alone, a number of people had to be fired, unfortunately. It was because they knowingly broke the procurement code, and it wasn't taking bribes, it wasn't criminal activity. It was just breaking the city's code around process. And so we did have to dismiss them. I'll tell you, I set a very strong course as best I could as chief operating officer. It's an interesting little-known fact that after Bill Campbell, they removed the vendor selection and work from the chief operating officer, which I think in general was a good thing because it kept the mayor's office further away from it. The problem is that it put all the power in the head of procurement because they were the only ones that sort of saw the vendor selection process going on. And so that's
well, the procurement officer is a guy who's been completely guilty, exactly. And he worked under you, though, didn't he? That's what some of your opponents are trying to link you.
And they are. And I, if I were in their shoes, I probably would say the same things. The good news is that the city code is very clear, and I believed in following the city code so strictly that the COO cannot be involved in vendor selection. So you don't participate in the scoring of vendors. You basically get handed a selected vendor. And actually, it's funny, most of my competitors who are saying that, in fact, virtually all of them, were or are on the city council. It's actually city council that has the legal power to approve the contractor. Just as at the federal level, they have the power of the purse. City council approves the vendor selection, and they hold hearings. They actually are the ones that can bring in the departments or procurement to talk about their selection and why and so forth, and then they vote on it. So they're the ones actually with the power.
Peter Aman, I'm hearing you say right now that the Keisha Lance Bottoms, who's right number 2 right now, I guess, and the Caesar Mitchells and the Kwanzaa Halls, they're responsible for corruption at City Hall?
Well, no, I didn't exactly say that. What I said was they had the ability to review vendors and contractors. So when people point to me and say, hey, you signed XYZ contract, the fact is I signed virtually every paper that came through city government for 2 years, tens of thousands of pages, as did the city attorney, chief financial officer, and about a dozen other people. But the people that made the actual decisions were city council. They're the ones that actually legally picked the vendors as recommended by the...
Peter, you're making a handsome salary doing what you do for
Well, I retired or departed, I guess I should say, about 18 months ago. I'm too young to really retire from anything. But so I've been a full-time candidate for a year and a half.
Well, why do you want to do this, man? You can make big money on the outside.
Well, for me, it's really not about the money. This would be a terrible investment if it was about the money, honestly. For me, it's about fixing things and improving the city of Atlanta because of what's going on in the city in a number of parts. I mean, there are people that are unnecessarily suffering. There are people that, in some big ways, we have more things we can do about homeless. homelessness. There are more things we can do about public safety. And in smaller ways, there are people that are inconvenienced in traffic every day. And I just really want to get at those problems and fix them and really be unconstrained. As mayor, you're clearly constrained by city council, by politics, and you serve the public. But really, there's a difference between having the top spot and any other spot.
Can you do this? I mean, again, you're smart as a whip, I've been told, and obviously you seem that way. But the next mayor will dole out the dollars for infrastructure coming from this a referendum for giving us money for that kind of stuff. I mean, this is the time when you need to be sharp about what you do with the money, right?
Yeah, and my belief, obviously, is that I can do it, and I bring a very, data-driven approach to it, right? You have to, in my mind, be very passionate about serving the needs of the people as part of this, but not falling into the trap of trying to serve the needs of the contractors that are calling you, right? And some of them may be excellent, some of them not so excellent. The point is that you have to serve the people, and we have. The most amount of money, to your point, in a generation really will be spent by the next mayor and city council. At the same time, the whole city is rezoned. We're going to look at all the zoning regulations about what buildings can be built where. And between those two things, the next mayor and city council are going to set the footprint of the city for the next 25 to 50 years, and they have the power to make or break certain people. So it's important that it be done incredibly fairly and ethically and effectively, right? We don't want to waste the money.
See, that's what I don't think a lot of people get. That's really what this election means. Atlanta's tomorrow.
This election is all about Atlanta's tomorrow. And, I've spoken at hundreds and hundreds of events, and very few people really understand those two fundamental things. The most amount of money on transportation and infrastructure in a generation since we built MARTA. And the relook, the changing potentially of all the zoning regulations in the city. That's huge. Those two things together can be transformative in very positive ways or, frankly, very negative ways for the city. I mean, we could lose all sorts of history and culture and neighborhoods, or we could reinforce our culture and make the city much easier to live in.
There are those who suggest, should you be elected, or Mary Norwood, we'll be losing our culture. We will ending a record. You talked about race, but does that confound you, confuse you? I mean, mess with you that it's always there, this race thing?
No, I as best as I can, I understand it. And as I like to say, I can't truly understand what it's like to suffer solely because of the color of your skin. You can only do but so much to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But what you can do is listen to people and show up and follow through with policies that will help you, that will help them, and that's what you should do. So it doesn't bother me because I understand as best as I can the perspectives of, look, we're dealing with 400 years of subjugation of the black people, and so that matters to people, and that's why I say it's up to the voters to decide what criteria they want to use to pick a candidate, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
You had to have some chutzpah to do this. I mean, you had 6 or 7 black candidates. You come from a history of black mayors. You worked for 2 of them. What made Peter Aman think, I can do this?
Blind faith, I guess. I don't know. It really kind of was. I had I have such a preparation for this from a perspective of having worked almost for 2 decades very closely with 2 different mayors, as you said, and administrations. I mean, with Mayor Franklin, I was there for a huge chunk of my time for many years, and got to know many people in the city and all parts of the city and city government, and really understand how city government works. And then I ran it as chief operating officer. And I worked with city council in both cases. I mean, in 2001, I sat up on the dais with city council while they were doing the budget at the beginning of 2002. As chief operating officer, I went to the Finance Executive Committee and other committees on a weekly basis to meet and talk to city council members. So I understand the operations part and the part of working with city council really well. So I feel like I'm very well prepared for much of the job. I will tell you that I don't think anybody is fully prepared for all of the job, right? I mean, there are always going to be things that you don't anticipate. You're always going to have blind spots, but that's why you pick a good team. That's why you keep City Hall inclusive the way it is now, and you pick a team that can help you see around those corners that you might not necessarily see around.
Speaking of a team, you do have a darn good team. You have Frederick Hicks running your campaign, who helped lead many of these referendums and that are now has the city in a good position financially. Was that deliberate, picking Fred because of his political acumen and his youth and vigor?
So Fred and the rest of the team have been absolutely terrific. And it was a number of things were very intentional. Certainly, my entire team has deep history with the city of Atlanta. It's also a very diverse team. It's 65% plus African American. So we have a very diverse team and a very knowledgeable team that's plugged into all sorts of issues within the city. So yes, it was intentional. And also, it's a good fit. One of the things that candidates will tell you that I talk to is that you have to have a good fit with your campaign manager. You have to have a similar style. And the rest of the team may not like it, but Fred and I have the same sense of humor. So we really enjoy talking to each other, and they just have to go along.
Will that be the same once you're elected? If you're elected, will you have that kind of balance working with you? And is that necessary in this still black city for a young white man to run the town?
So absolutely, the city is going to be as inclusive when I'm mayor as it is today. So it is not going to be a change in some sort of drastic way that I think some people fear.
Some people fear that.
Some people fear it. No, they really do. And what I like to say is, look, we're going to do national searches for key positions, but we're going to have a preference and focus on internal hires where we can. There are some departments where that's more important than others, frankly, where you really want to maintain and promote from within, especially in some of the public safety departments and some of the other ones. But whatever I do, we are going to have a very, very inclusive government, and absolutely I need that as a team, the team to have that.
Peter, what is your message to black businesses as a mayoral candidate? A good friend of mine, Matt Wilbur, called me, woke me up the other morning and said, I like this guy, but will I be on out? Will I be out of business at the airport? Black businesses are concerned, but yet some of them are excited about you.
So, I try and take this issue head on. I'm very clear that I believe that we should not only maintain but actually improve the disadvantaged business enterprise programs, both at the airport and at City Hall. We have a whole series of programs that Mayor Jackson put in place. I mean, he invented these programs that created black millionaires and helped create a black middle class and build a black middle class.
But they've stayed there. They've stayed on the dole.
And so, well, the way I look at it is that we need the programs because the disparity still exists. We still have racism in this country. We still have implicit bias in this country. All these things, we have systemic discrimination and things like redlining. All of these burdens exist, so we need these programs to overcome them. I do believe that there are certain things that we need to do for transparency. For example, at the airport, if you have two vendors that are bidding, let's say a Wendy's and a Burger King, and they offer you the same rent, it's going to be the same square footage, and it fits equally well, then let's just do a lottery. Let's just flip a coin, or there are companies that will do this in a certified fashion for you. I do believe that we can introduce some things that will, while you will still have the DBE programs, but it will make it more transparent in certain circumstances, sort of how the decision is being made, so we can get away from this perception, which is widespread, that it is an uneven playing field. Sort of people who've been there a long time just are going to be there.
How do you and Fred and your campaign team look at black media buyers, the black newspapers, the online publications like us? I mean, is that key to what you do, or you're in the crunch time now, money's going to be spent strategically? Is that something you look at?
Yes, absolutely. Black media is incredibly important for a couple of reasons. First of all, I am fighting for every vote in this city. I am, and I have to, right? I need to fight for every single vote in the city, throughout the city. And black media is the way to reach a whole host of people that I couldn't otherwise reach through other media. So it's the right thing to do from a data perspective, from a reaching people perspective, from a running a balanced campaign. But I also believe I did media consulting for many years at Bain. I worked with large newspaper companies and television companies. I'm a huge believer in the importance of journalism. I believe that our country is at risk because of the decline in the size of newspaper newsrooms. A regional newspaper used to have 500 people in the newsroom. Now it has 150 people. I think that's a real problem. So when we can support black media and help continue with the journalism associated with that, I think that's incredibly important.
One of the things that's troubling to many of us in this room, particularly our videographer here, is the decline or the failing prospects for public access television. Would you commit to that? People TV was once it. That's lost its funding. It's up for bid again. As mayor, would you make sure that's alive and well?
Yes. We need to figure out how we fund it, whether we fund it through city government, or I'd love to fund it, frankly, philanthropically. But I will tell you, one of my very first jobs was in public access television. Oh. So when cable TV came to our town in 1980, 1981, our local municipality required that there be a very strong public access program. It was a requirement of the franchise. And I didn't get paid for it, but I interned for several years running the camera, producing shows, and doing all sorts of things. And I think it's incredibly important to cover not only government, but just all the sorts of things in the city that can't get the big stations to cover.
There are two prominent, two leading white candidates in this race. Mary's been out here before. Mary Norwood has been out here before, and she still supposedly has a lead. But that could change at any day, I'm sure. What's the difference between you and Mary Norwood? Why would I vote for you as opposed to her?
So there's several things that I talk about. First, in terms of experience, I have the experience of having actually run the city, and no other candidate has that, right? A couple years of experience actually running each of the departments, overseeing the departments.
You've been there, done that.
I've been there, done that. And the experience, by the way, of watching Mayor Franklin do it and her team do it for many years, up close and personal, and working with the administration. No other candidate has that experience relative to the city. Second, I worked with some of the largest and most complex companies in the world in the consulting firm I was with. And I helped them deploy amounts of capital, actually far bigger than the $14 billion we're talking about spending in the city. I know a set of tools and techniques that will work in government. Government is very different than business. And business people should not be, people who are good at business should not be confused into thinking that they'll be good in government necessarily. Right. It's very different. That said, there are some techniques that are used in business that can be used in government, and I bring those skills. And that's another area of difference. A third is that I've made the tough calls and been fiscally responsible. Mary Norwood voted to expand retroactively the pension program. She proposed things in 2009. The alternative press, creative loafing, actually called budget busting. When you're being criticized by creative loafing for wanting to spend too much money, that should get people's attention. And even as recently as a few months ago, she talked about the desire to spend the reserves on pensions. Now look, don't get me wrong, our police officers, our firefighters need raises. We're losing them at way too high a rate. We have to give people raises. But we can't undo the progress on the fiscal side of the city and give away the reserves, one-time money to pensions. We just can't afford to do that.
Peter, what does this election mean? How important is it? What does this election mean for Atlanta, for you, and for the audience? This is an important election, is it not?
Yes, this is a very important election. I like to say this is a bet the farm election, because it really is about what Atlanta looks like in 25 or 50 years. Are we going to have the same thriving diversity in culture? Are we going to have affordable housing? Are we going to have the neighborhoods that we have today that are so precious to us? Are we going to add to it a best in the country public education system, which we've been working on but we haven't achieved, early childhood learning? So this is a big deal for Atlanta. I talked earlier about the physical footprint of the city is up for grabs, so to speak. And we need to make sure that we spend the taxpayers' money wisely, and that we do so in an equitable manner. Equity is very important to me, and equity, as you know, in part means things like having the DBE program so that you make up for past wrongs. So this is a very important election. I'm curious what you think it means, though, if I can ask you your thoughts on this. You've been an observer for some time, and I'm just curious what you think it means.
I think this election is as important, if not more significant, than when Maynard Jackson won. This is the new age, the new day for Atlanta, whoever wins. Because of where we are financially, what this new money will mean to Atlanta's future, where we are with regard to infrastructure and traffic, with regard to how the city is ballooning. It'll be twice its size in less than a decade. The next mayor will carve much of that. Are you the guy for the job?
I'm the guy for the job. Absolutely. 100% guaranteed.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.